All right, welcome to the WrestleMania 37 Roundtable on both the Fight Game podcast and the Fight Game Media YouTube channel. I'm Double G, host of the Fight Game podcast, and I wanted to introduce you to the rest of the folks here on the Roundtable. In our bottom left, we have Paul Fontaine. He is the co-host of two podcasts on the Fight Game Media Network. The Dynamite Show, our weekly AEW Dynamite recap show, and In the Clinch, our MMA show. He also writes for the Wrestling Observer and Fight Game Media. On the bottom right is Andy Marshall. He's the co-host of Break It Down, our WWE Big Show recap podcast, and writes for Fight Game Media about WWE. And lastly, your upper left, Jeremy Finestone. He helps with content and engagement with both the Fight Game Media Network as well as our social media outlets. Fellas, thank you all for joining. And before we get started here, I wanted everyone to share their shirt that they are wearing. Most of us are wearing some pro wrestling inspired attire. So Jeremy, kick it off. What shirt are you wearing? And I guess this is your spirit animal for the evening.
I mean, we're going with layers up in Northern California. So I'm starting with a retro Shawn Michaels vintage t-shirt, followed by the oh-so clearance back in 2020 Daniel Bryan $12 hoodie that somehow became relevant all over again. Amazing time.
And Andy, I see you are wearing something fairly similar.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day here in upstate New York, so I just went with just a t-shirt, but I have my Daniel Bryan original Yes Movement t-shirt that I proudly wear, and I really wanted to wear something for someone competing tonight. I do have a Cesaro shirt, but I ultimately, this is the main event, probably what I'm most excited for, so I went with D-Bry.
All right, and Paul, it doesn't look like you're wearing a wrestling shirt.
That's not entirely true. So it's a Winnipeg Jets jersey, but underneath, I don't want to strip for you guys, but I am wearing, you might even see the logo here. I got a Diesel shirt on circa 1994.
Wow.
And it's the original. It's not a retro. It's the original. So he went into the Hall of Fame as part of the NWO this week. So, yeah, it's my go-to lounge around all day, which is basically every day of this pandemic for the last 13 months.
All right, my shirt is a Stone Cold Steve Austin pro wrestling t-shirt. So not a WWE shirt, but pro wrestling tees. I just liked that design for Stone Cold Steve Austin. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we are going to go deep on four main topics having to do with this year's WrestleMania and WWE in general, as the big show comes to us on two nights, Saturday and Sunday, on the Peacock streaming network. Okay, so first question to you guys, and we'll actually start with Jeremy. After a full year away from fans are back. WrestleMania 37, 25,000 or so fans. What is your expectation for this show?
I think I have expectations for actually a pretty good show. One of the things that we as fans tend to forget is that when WWE is forced to put on a good show, they do put on a really good show. And this WrestleMania, when I was looking over the two cards today, they have at least one really good card and another card that is pretty good, but you put it all together and it does feel like WrestleMania, even though the idea of what WrestleMania is something that we're going to be talking about here, what it has been, what it will be, what it is now. But for expectations of WrestleMania this year, I think it's going to meet my expectation.
So, Paul, you are somebody who has traveled before to the big event. We hung out in Dallas for 32. Without the traveling fan base, at least for the most part, and with the smaller crowds on both nights, do you think it will feel like WrestleMania as you're sitting watching on your couch?
Okay, I'm glad you phrased that way. No. I think it's going to feel more like it did last year. But I guess I don't think it will. I hope it will. I'm curious if they're going to do anything differently. But I guess like you had put out in one of our conversations, I'm setting my expectations low this week and hoping that that it will exceed my expectations.
And Andy, I want to follow up a little bit on what Paul was referencing, which was last year we had a WrestleMania that entirely did not feel like WrestleMania, to no fault of their own. They were thrown with the pandemic. Everybody was kind of, thrown a curveball there. But WWE put on a show in front of 0 fans. This year, there will be fans. Do you think it will feel closer to like a real WrestleMania, or will it feel closer to last year's WrestleMania?
Oh, it feels a lot more like a real WrestleMania to me. Last year, I think the big question and the thing I was concerned with was they should they even have this WrestleMania at all? Is this just not the time? Should they just pull the plug and say, hey, kind of the state of everything right now, we should probably not put this show on? And wrestling was there for people last year, and I think people are going to be really excited to get out and do stuff and have something. So I kind of see it as kind of a return. Absolutely. And it feels like WrestleMania to me.
By the way, for people listening on the podcast, they don't see my Zoa energy drink. Zoa, the new brand from The Rock. But for the podcast, hey, we'll advertise Zoa. What are you drinking, Andy?
I got some Polar Seltzer over here. If we can get a Polar sponsorship.
Paul, you got some coffee? What's going on over there?
No, it's that ain't water, except it is water. And in the world's best mom cup.
There you go.
Because my wife is
0 for the caffeine.
Oh, there we go. Exactly. All right, so I'll throw this one back to Jeremy. Do you feel like WWE is kind of just getting through this year's WrestleMania, to set up next year's WrestleMania in Dallas to where they could actually attract, maybe another 100,000 fans? Or do you think WWE really sees it? Like, is Vince McMahon thinking like, you know what? This is WrestleMania. We're putting out the best show humanly possible. We're not even thinking about next year until next year.
I think it's both. I think they're already in the rearview mirror when it comes to this year and all the stories and the runs that they have, but they do feel some sense of obligation to finish up what they have going on here. I want the matches and I want the WrestleMania to be better than the Boneyard match, platitudes and compliments that we gave it last year. And we need to think about what was the last real WrestleMania like that we had fans. We're talking about Seth and Brock opening the show. We're talking about Becky and Ronda Rousey and Charlotte at the end of the show. Is that the WrestleMania that we want it to feel like, or do we just want it to feel better than last year? Is what is acceptable to all of us in terms of what is the clearing hurdle for everybody?
Andy, you wanted to jump in about something related to 35?
Yeah, so 35, I think one of the reasons I'm excited this year is that there's kind of a clear pirate theme. And I know that was supposed to be last year's, and it's kind of a rehash just because it's in Raymond James. But think back to 35, it was like a WrestleMania themed WrestleMania. There was just a big screen. They didn't even really acknowledge that they were in New York other than the kind of the media blitz. So yeah, I was kind of thinking on the same lines as Jeremy, that I'm comparing it to the last real WrestleMania, which was that one. And even though that was really in my own backyard down in New Jersey, I wasn't like compelled to see it. I regret not going to 29, but that one just didn't really do it for me. So this one, I think I'm almost more excited for this one.
So Paul, just to kind of, I'll get your thoughts and then I'll wrap this up. At the end of the day, when we shut our TVs off on Sunday, do you feel like you will have watched something worthy?
You mean like after I watched the Chris Jericho interview?
Spit out my Zoa.
Sorry. I I do. I mean, again, expectations low. I think it was Jeremy mentioned, like, on paper these are. I assume you're talking about the second night as being the really solid card.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if they build properly, I think that it could be special, and the fans, like, especially if they have, like, if it's not too long, like, if they keep it to 3 hours or maybe just a little bit more than 3 hours for the main card, I think that the fans will go home happy. Nobody ever wants a repeat of that Dallas show again, where, it was like, what, 7.5, 8 hours between the first pre-show match and the main event. Like, and some of these recent shows have been like 2.5 hours, and it's been great. Like, by the end of the show, like, the main event, it's like, the main event's here already. Like, you almost wanted more. And I think it's good that if they leave you with wanting more, and then you'll be more excited for Raw the next night.
But what does that
going
tell
forward.
you about the current product, though, if what they want is to have a long show, and when they can't give you a long show because of the time, and then they give you a shorter show, you, as the fan, are actually more excited.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they're two masters, right? You want to put on a good show, but you also have a content provider to please. And if your show is longer, then there's more eyeballs for more hours on the show. So I think it's finding that mix of, if people are not watching the show at all because they think it's going to be too long, then, you definitely don't want that. But if they watch the whole show and it's only 2.5 hours long, and then maybe, like, they were so excited they even go back and watch something else, then you've got more hours. And plus, now you're going to have people sticking around for that interview I mentioned, so they will get those eyeballs sticking around. But if they go till midnight, maybe they won't. It'll be like, okay, I'm going to shut my TV off. I do want to see this Jericho interview, but I've already been sitting in front of my TV for 6 hours. I'm done. So
I'll put a capper on this one for me. So I think how many of us will feel is that we will feel very happy with the shows because of the fact that there's a crowd again, right? I think that's a big thing with wrestling fans. Wrestling fans, I think, want to give these companies the benefit of the doubt for having to do these shows without having a live crowd, and that's a big part of the wrestling experience. So for that, I do think wrestling fans will give WWE the benefit of the doubt for this show. Secondly, and I think Jeremy has mentioned this, I do think there's going to be some inspiration from Vince McMahon to put smiles on faces. They say they like to do that, and yet, it's all about the heels. But I do think that there's going to be some favorable outcomes for baby faces, because you don't want this to be a very heat-heavy show, because we're all sort of reminded while watching that we are still in a pandemic, because this football stadium is, a third of the way full. So I think the show will be good. I think we will feel good watching it. But I do think there's going to be some, okay, once this is over, WWE will probably say, okay, now the road to the real WrestleMania is beginning. Okay, second topic here. There was word, and I think this came actually from a Sasha Banks interview. She said that she and Bianca were going to close night one. On Raw, they sure as heck made it seem that Drew and Bobby Lashley were going to close night one. So I'll start with Andy, our Break It Down co-host here. What do you think should be the main event of night one?
I think it should absolutely be Sasha and Bianca, just because, especially if the direction they're going is with Bianca Belair, I think they have a real great opportunity right now. And, she could step up and win. And that would really, make her in the moment. And Sasha Banks, I don't think really has to worry about that. I mean, they could just come back and do this next year and do the reverse if they really needed to. But I think she's already maybe their biggest star. and at least from the women's division for sure. And if they could have the opportunity to bring Bianca up to that level this soon, I say just do it.
Jeremy, do you agree or disagree with Andy?
I think I agree. I've been trying to wrap my head around why Drew and Bobby should be main eventing, and none of the arguments seem to have the weight and magnitude as to the reasons why Sasha and Bianca should. But at the same time, Bobby and Drew really does feel like the hotter program right now. I'm not entirely sure if that was the intention of the company to make it feel that way. My personal preference, my heart says Sasha and Bianca. My head says Drew and Bobby.
Paul, thoughts on both of those statements?
Okay, so it's gonna sound funny because I agree with both of them. So I want to present a scenario here. So the day after the Royal Rumble, let's say that it's decided that, the day after Bobby Lashley wins the world title, we'll say, it's decided that Drew and Bobby are going to fight for the title at WrestleMania. So right away, Bobby introduces a masseuse as his side piece or whatever, and the masseuse is flirting with him and he's not interested, and MVB kicks her to the curb, and then the masseuse starts hitting on Drew, and then the masseuse starts accompanying Drew to ringside, and then he's not interested in her, and then all of a sudden the masseuse is cozying up with the New Day, and then this all leads to a tag team match at Fastlane between the New Day and Bobby and Drew, and Drew ends up getting pinned by Kofi Kingston. And then that's going to lead to the main event of WrestleMania. Well, if you presented that scenario to me, I'd say absolutely not. It should be the other way. So I want to go back to the day after the Royal Rumble when this program was at its hottest, and WWE deciding this is going to main event one of the nights of WrestleMania, and we're going to treat this seriously. Bianca's going to keep winning matches. Sasha's going to keep winning matches. They're going to cut promos on each other, and they are not going to touch, or they may touch, but they're not going to. Neither of them is getting pinned by anybody leading into WrestleMania. We've seen Bianca be pinned a bunch of times. We've seen Sasha lose a couple times. I'm not sure if she's been pinned, but I know she's lost. And so, based on the way that they've booked, Bobby and Drew definitely should be the main event, but Sasha and Bianca absolutely should have been the main event, and they should have booked accordingly.
Jeremy, counterpoint?
Fundamental issue that I have with that is that the build started the day after Royal Rumble for Sasha and Bianca, but the build basically started after the Elimination Chamber, and not even that for Bobby and Drew. Like, you knew that was the direction, but it wasn't locked in until 5 days before Fastlane in the middle of March. I fundamentally have a problem with giving the platitudes of the main event and closing down a show for a match that's been advertised for 2 weeks.
What Paul said is very interesting, but I thought something that is also interesting is the women's matches, both of the title matches. They both put them in tag teams on the same team, and it's almost like a frenemies kind of thing. And it's like, the women, they're friendly, or they don't trust each other, and then they're going to backstab each other, and that's kind of been the story. And I think that's a really tired trope. WWE, for as much good as they've done recently with the women's division, they still have really catty and tired tropes when it comes to their storytelling. So, to Paul's point, Drew and Bobby, this is really the Clash of the Titans, right? Two strongly booked guys who are just finally, this is the irresistible force meeting the immovable object, to quote Gorilla Monsoon from 35 years ago. But I wish they could have done something similar with the women when, it's kind of a very similar story told for both women's title matches. So agree with both of you. I personally, for me, I think what is interesting, and maybe if you guys want to get thoughts in on this, is if one of them main events, would you put the other one on first to kick the show off? And also, which position do you want to be in? Do you want to be the first match back with the live crowd? Possibly, but there is still this thing with the main event and being the chosen main event, even if your match doesn't really have to do much with the buy rate or the gate or the Peacock subscribers. There is still something to that where people really do strive for that. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? And we can go to whoever.
Yeah, I do actually. If to think about the idea of going on last versus first, first of all, good enough for Brock Lesnar, good enough for me. I know that it probably wouldn't have been, maybe if he wasn't losing the match, which he ultimately did, he would have felt differently. But I think it's so hard to get on a WrestleMania card these days as it is, and especially to be booked in a world title feud. So it doesn't mean the same thing as it did at a house show or even at WrestleManias 1 through 15. It's a different time. So going on first, kicking the show off, I think just as an honor. It's a world title match at WrestleMania.
Jeremy, thoughts?
So think about this. You have, as the first major pay-per-view for Peacock, you're advertising this left or right. The first thing you hear is those chimes for Drew McIntyre, and you see this big old hoss of a dude come out with this sword and drop it down. And they tell you this guy is the greatest thing in the world. You have that to start the show. Match goes whatever it is. Now, think about Dallas. Think about Sasha Banks. Think about that entrance that she had and what an absolute star that she was coming out, and everybody felt it. Everybody saw it. Everybody believed it. That's the kind of thing. If you're able to do those kind of entrances for the women at the end of the show, it's going to mean a heck of a lot more for them coming out with these superstar entrances than if they're coming out in the daylight and the first thing and they're opening the show. They'll feel like the opening band and not the big stars. Drew McIntyre can come out and carry it in the beginning. I'm not necessarily sure that presence will carry for the women.
So there's something interesting about this, which is, and it's kind of what Paul has said already, this isn't going to be poor Ronda, poor Becky, and poor Charlotte having to be the last match of like a 7-hour card when people are so worried about getting home because of public transportation and then it starts raining. That was like the worst of all circumstances for those three women to get into that match. And I do think that it affected them as well. This show, if they do keep it tight, if we've only been sitting there for 2 hours and 25 minutes by the time we get to the main event, then I think it could be a benefit to either the men or the women, no matter who main events. But if we had the same old 7-hour card that we had back 2 years ago, then I would rather go first, preferably like if I was wrestling. Anyways, let's move on. I want to go over the card. We'll read off all the matches. At least this is what we have before. There's no SmackDown yet, so they could change things up. But night 1, we have Sasha and Bianca, which we've been talking about. We have Bobby and Drew, which we've been talking about. We have Bad Bunny and Damian Priest against The Miz and John Morrison. We have The New Day, Kofi and Woods versus AJ Styles and Omos. We have Braun Strowman against Shane in a steel cage match. We have Cesaro versus Seth Rollins, which I think could be the sort of the underrated match of the whole weekend. And then we have a tag team turmoil match. Lana, Naomi, Dana Brooke. Lana and Naomi versus Dana Brooke and Mandy Rose versus the Riot Squad versus Natalya and Tamina. Winners receive a tag team title match on night 2. There's speculation that the Bellas could actually be put in that match. There's speculation that Charlotte and Bayley could be put in that match for a surprise. As it is, that match looks terrible on paper because I saw that segment on SmackDown, and it was really, really bad. So I hope that they have an idea to kind of spruce it up a little bit. So that's night 1. Here's night 2. Roman against Edge against Daniel Bryan. Triple threat match for the Universal title. Asuka and Rhea Ripley for the Raw Women's title. The Fiend with Alexa Bliss versus Randy Orton. Big E versus Apollo Crews in a Nigerian drum fight for the Intercontinental Championship. Kevin Owens versus Sami Zayn with Logan Paul in Sami Zayn's corner. Riddle against Sheamus. How come he's not Matt Riddle anymore? That bothers me. And then Nia Jax and Shayna will face the winner of the tag team turmoil match. So I'm going to go to Paul first. Which night do you like better and why?
I guess I'd have to go with night 2. And just seems on paper like a better better matches. And I'm probably a little more into the Fiend Alexa Bliss stuff than most of the people here and most of the people in the world. And that's not to say I like it a lot. I just probably like it a little bit more than most people do.
Andy, what are your thoughts?
Night 2, just as far as people I want to see perform, Riddle, don't call him Matt. I'm obviously a Dan O'Brien fan. I think that is the true main event, and it has been built up like a true main event. And we can talk about night 1, night 2, but that's the match I think most people want to see. And then, Asuka and Rhea Ripley, take my money. I want to see that very badly. So night 2, and I haven't even mentioned Kevin Owens versus Sami Zayn, which is a feud as old as time. So night 2, it almost in a walk.
Jeremy?
It's night 2. It's not close. It would be a perfect WrestleMania card if The Fiend and Randy Orton was not on there, if Cesaro and Seth Rollins was in there in its place. If they had that card instead of The Fiend and Randy Orton, I would watch night 1 clinically, and I would watch night 2 with at the edge of my seat. I think there are about 10 matches out of the 14 that I'm actually really excited for, and I'm not feeling some sense of dread or frustration or general malaise. And for a WrestleMania, 10 out of 14, that's actually pretty good.
Andy, I saw a face that you made with the mention of The Fiend.
So I'm not super down on it. This is a feud that is supposed to culminate at WrestleMania. This has carried television for months. It's provided a lot of memeable and internet-worthy moments throughout, including The Fiend getting burnt to a crisp, very famously. So this is when you have an idea for WrestleMania and you kind of work backwards. To me, is what they've done. And this is just the logical endpoint. This was always designed to have a huge blow-off match at Mania. So it should be on. That's another reason why it feels like it's night 2, just because this is the end of a story.
I'm going to disagree with all three of you, actually. I actually like night 1 best, but they're close. I mean, I think they've evened it out pretty well. I want to see Sasha and Bianca a lot. Even maybe the build hasn't been the best. And I said, Cesaro and Seth Rollins might be like the underdog best match of the weekend. Bobby and Drew is just the Clash of the Titans. Now, there are possibly really bad things on night 1 that could discourage, someone from picking. But on night 2, you do have Randy Orton and The Fiend, which is not something I really care about. So I think they're pretty even. I'm guessing everybody really wants to see Roman and Edge and Daniel Bryan, and we'll get to that in a second. I think that's probably the match I want to see the most. But I also feel that, just based on who wins that match, it will be – I think it's going to be weird no matter what happens in the booking of that match. So, actually, let's move to that. What is the outcome, Jeremy, of Bryan, Reigns, and Edge?
Daniel Bryan's winning. And I've thought about this because I felt like you were going to ask me this question. And from the get-go, I've argued you don't put a big face like Daniel Bryan into a WrestleMania match and have him lose. It is madness. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized Daniel Bryan is a bigger mainstream star than Edge. When Edge came back, he didn't get all the headlines and the news reports and all the coverage saying Daniel Bryan is coming back. He didn't even get as much press when he retired. It was an entire show for Daniel Bryan and a segment for Edge. Yes, it was 8 or 9 years later, was a whole different time frame. But the whole idea that Daniel Bryan is brought into this match, a major star through Bellows and WWE and everything else, and set him up to lose this match is just madness to me. I'm sure there's going to be counterpoints here, and I'm ready to hear them because I need to be convinced otherwise. Because if I see it and Edge or Roman Reigns wins, I'm not going to have a problem, but I feel like I'm not going to be able to see it coming.
So I think the counterpoint to what Jeremy says is that Daniel Bryan is actually there to eat the pin so that Roman Reigns doesn't take the loss. Paul, what are your thoughts on what happens in this match?
Well, I guess my first thought is that I don't really have a strong feeling anyway. Like I could see any one of these three guys winning.
Neither do
And
the odds makers, by the way.
Yeah, and I was going to say that, and I like that. I like the fact that I can logically see any of these guys winning and where it would go if they did. So because of that, I find this match really compelling because I'll be way more invested in it, knowing that any guy could win and anybody could be pinned. Although I guess I would think that it's unlikely that Roman Reigns is going to eat a pin, regardless of what happens. So it's either going to be, Roman pinning Edge or Bryan, or Edge pinning Bryan, or Bryan pinning Edge. I feel like, and eventually, no matter who wins, like if Edge or Daniel Bryan win, it's going to be a short-term reign to get back to Roman. So in that sense, I think I would rather just have Roman retain, and that way he's kept strong, because I think that the money match is next year in Dallas, and it's almost unfathomable to think that they could keep the title on Roman that long. But that said, I mean, they've got some long-term champions in WWE right now. In some cases, it's circumstances that have done it. But if anybody is going to keep the title for a long time and still be on TV and still be wrestling, once a month on pay-per-view, it's Roman Reigns. I can't see them doing it with Lashley. I can't see them doing it with Drew. So then if it's a big match next year, whether it's, Brock Lesnar or, somebody else, some other rabbit out of the hat, or some other star that they build up, Karrion Kross or, Keith Lee or whatever they're going to do, then, Big E, I'd like to see Roman Reigns kept strong until next year.
All right, Andy, after you've heard two sort of dissenting arguments, where do you sit with this?
Roman Reigns is winning the match. I think that I think that, first of all, they're worried about him getting cheered. Well, I don't really think he ever deserved to get booed all those times, specifically WrestleMania 32. So if they cheer the man, great, good for him. But I think he's going to win. I think that Daniel Bryan is there to lose, because I think with the Edge heel turn, they have other plans for him, and it's maybe not the world title scene, but if they keep him hot as a heel, they can move him down the line to something else. I know he's wanted to work with AJ Styles. That would be pretty cool. AJ is kind of teetering on the brink of a face turn anyways. So I think there's just other plans now for Edge. So I see Roman Reigns retaining.
When I first saw Daniel Bryan get added to this match, my initial thought was he's eating the pin so that Edge can win the title without having to beat Roman Reigns, because they don't have long-term plans for Edge, but they wanted that really great comeback story. Now, the thing that changed is that Edge became a heel, so I don't know if that long-term storyline actually works anymore. From Jeremy's point of view, Daniel Bryan winning would be so fun, right? Daniel Bryan pinning Edge or getting him to tap out would be so fun, because the crowd goes home happy. This is a very popular guy. Personally, I would feel super manipulated because he is not in their long-term plans. Now, maybe he wins the match. All of a sudden, there's a increase on Raw, and Vince goes, maybe we stretch this out a little bit. But otherwise, I would feel that the only reason Daniel Bryan won the match is because they wanted fans to go home happy, but they have no thoughts of making him the guy. So thus, I don't really want to see it, even though that would be the thing that would make me the happiest as a fan. Let's move on to if this is the match that you're most looking forward to, what is the second? And if it isn't, then what is your first match that you're looking most forward to? I'll ask Paul first.
So you're talking for both nights?
Yeah.
So for me, the match I'm looking most forward to out of all of them is Bobby Lashley and Drew McIntyre. I feel like they have. I can't remember the last time that WWE has done a better job of keeping two guys as strong as they have with those two, especially Lashley. And I know they're going to have a physical match, which is the style I really like. And I honestly have no idea who's going to win. Like when they put the title on Lashley, I just assumed it was going to be for a month in order to get it back to Drew. And Lashley's been so good that I could see them going against that original decision, and I'd be totally fine with that. But I'd also be totally fine with Drew getting the win. And that's also why, I'm kind of right now behind it, be main eventing that first night.
Andy.
Night one, Lashley and Drew for a lot of the same reasons as Paul. But for me, overall, it's Asuka and Rhea Ripley. For all this talk about the build of the SmackDown women's match, we had Asuka come out and say no one is ready for Asuka. And then Rhea Ripley is like, oh, well, I think I am. And we have this match and I am very ready for it. And that's all the build we need, because we know who Rhea Ripley is. We know what she's capable of. We know who Asuka is. I can't wait to watch it. It's going to be awesome.
But you know why she was ready? According to her, she was just getting tired of sitting in catering. Jeremy.
All SmackDown, all the time. Night one, I got to say Cesaro, Seth Rollins is probably going to steal the show. And then night two, I can't see Sammy and Kevin Owens, my doppelganger, Kevin Owens, doing anything less than completely just trying to take all the wind out of everybody else's sails in those matches. Those two are built for nothing less. And this is their shot. They're doing it. They're jumping off that WrestleMania ship and everything. There's a steel cage, so Shane ain't doing it. It's all Kevin and Sammy getting thrown off a ship.
Logan Paul's taking that bump.
As long as they don't jump off the skull like Io and hit really hard from what it sounded like at TakeOver. Whew. Okay.
What a spot.
Last question, and we'll go around the room here. Now I'm asking you to look into the future post WrestleMania. What do you expect for WWE once fans are actually able to come back? Do we expect a hot period just because of that fact? And do we expect WWE to take advantage of this? Or is it going to be kind of what it was before the pandemic, which was, they're just sort of on a treadmill doing the thing that they do, and that's just kind of what WWE is now. So we'll go around the room. We'll start with Jeremy, then we'll go to Paul, then we'll go to Andy.
I think WWE is going to struggle to fill those arenas when they get back. I think the product has been cold, and one or two shows that are pretty hot is not going to change the general trend. I think the first couple of shows, maybe the first two SmackDowns, the first two Raws, the first two NXTs, they're gonna have a healthy turnout. People are gonna get excited. The first show in markets. But it's going to start trailing off, and it's probably going to trail off quicker, and we're going to be talking about the fans not showing up, and we're going to be discussing, is it COVID fears? Is it the product being cold? And we're not going to know, but that's going to be the conversation, I think.
Paul, agree or disagree?
I think I mostly agree with what Jeremy was saying. I think that there's going to be kind of a honeymoon period when they first come back, and how long that's going to last is going to depend on what they actually provide the fans. So if they give them something they want to see and they keep up, then they're going to be even more receptive. If not, they're going to be politely receptive at first and then probably turn on it pretty quick. I think. So if, let's just say, for example, they come back, they're talking like Q3. So if, if they start touring in July and it gets to SummerSlam, like if the TV leading up to SummerSlam isn't good, you could have a pretty negative crowd at SummerSlam in August.
Andy.
I was going to follow up to that. The build for SummerSlam starts next week. Like if I'm in WWE creative, we need to make sure that show is going to be almost as big as WrestleMania from a booking standpoint, because, with vaccination rates, I mean, there's a possibility that it could be. And that's a really great time. I think Paul made a great point there too. There is going to be a honeymoon period. People want to get out. If there's going to be shows, people want to go out. They want to chant. They want to just, be out of their houses, I think. So because wrestling has been there this entire time, I think they might have built up some goodwill. I think there might be some people that have checked out the product because of the pandemic. So I do expect it initially, but I think the lull is always after SummerSlam, and can you hold it through the next Mania build? So that's when they always start to panic. I would say just focus on SummerSlam and cross that bridge when you get there.
Okay, follow-up question for you, Andy. I'm assuming what you're saying is that we will be in a place where we will have fans at SummerSlam.
I'm really hopeful. And, Vince McMahon is going to take that chance, I think. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that if it's possible for him to promote, he's going to do whatever he is legally allowed to, and maybe illegally allowed to at some points, as far as capacity. But, they want to make sure that wrestling is there for their fans and that they have been here all along. So I think it's just a great way to capitalize.
What do you think about them actually running another outdoor stadium for SummerSlam? What is Vegas like in August? Like 110? So that's
brutal.
Probably not a good idea. But I'm thinking of somewhere where you could actually run an outdoor stadium. Maybe it's, instead of 25, maybe it's 40, and it's not 60 or 70. So maybe you do still keep it a little bit smaller. But I would, if it is close by to me, like if they, I don't know, maybe they run it at Levi's or something, that would actually, in August, it's gonna be pretty hot too. But I could see, and I'm talking football stadiums, right? I'm not talking, small baseball parks. I'm talking big, giant football stadiums to where you could create the feeling that this is something that people are super interested in, because I think part of what Paul and Jeremy were saying earlier is that is going to be a problem. Is the fan base going to come back with open arms and in droves? But there has to be a reason, right? You have to have something, whether it's Brock Lesnar coming back, John Cena coming back for a show here and there. You have to bring something. You can't just expect to go, okay, we just got out of a pandemic, no draw, come back, right? There's got to be, they have to utilize this opportunity to to make something happen. So that is my thing. And then I guess my last question to you guys: what do you sense could be something big that they could do to spice up the product through this year, this sort of uncertain year, because we do have to build something big for next year's WrestleMania? How do we get through this period? Is there a wrestler? Is there a certain act that is maybe not even on the roster today? What do? You have Vince McMahon's ear. What do you do? Let's start with Paul, and we'll end the show with this last question.
I mean, the obvious answer is Brock, Ronda, or Becky, or any and or all of them would be probably maybe the easiest thing to do. You just got to throw money at it and they'll come back, I'm sure.
They have a lot of it.
Yeah, they do. The other idea that I had was, a guy, I mean, I've been a big proponent of Karrion Kross forever. I think he's exactly what they are looking for. The package with Scarlett is awesome, and he's not as good in the ring as most people that they would put in that position, but I'm not sure how important that is. If they're behind him, I think that's the more important thing. And if they've got the workers in there that can carry him to good matches and carry on. So like for me, like I would bring him in and have him be unbeaten, have him win the Royal Rumble, and have him challenging at Mania next year as one of your world title matches. And then the other one would be either Brock Lesnar or maybe even John Cena if you can get him for 3 or 4 months. You need a big deal, and I would save The Rock for the following year at LA if they can somehow manage to do that, and if he's willing to wrestle in 2 years. I think
Dwayne
that
might be 50 by then, though, right?
well, he will be. Well, isn't he over 50 now? I know he's pretty close to my age.
I think he's only like 3 or 4 years older than me. So
I think he was born in 71, so he might be. Yeah, he'll be 50, 51. But I mean, he's in good shape, and I mean, it's not like he has to have a 5-star classic. But I mean, I think that like Rock and Roman is a money match in 2 years if they can get there, if everything works out right. But for the coming year, yeah, I'd like to see one star that they have on the roster, and I use Karrion Kross, but maybe there's somebody else as and I'm just talking men. I mean, for women, they have a lot of options for women, and we could talk for days about that, but and I think that's important too. So and you have like try all of it, and whatever's working, stick with it. And I think that's key, and that's I hope they learn. If something's working, don't fight it, just go with it.
Andy, you got Vince McMahon's ear. What do you want to see?
Well, I think we have the potential for a WrestleMania 21 moment where they were the last two in the Women's Royal Rumble this year. Both of them are challenging for world titles. I think putting Rhea Ripley and Bianca Belair in those championship spots is an absolute must for this show. And this even extends down to NXT, where we've already seen Raquel Gonzalez win last night at Stand and Deliver. I think there's even someone else at NXT who's going to kind of be presented as the next guy going forward, which is Kyle O'Reilly. I think at least that has yet to happen tonight, but I think they're going to close the show with him tonight, and he's going to kind of be the new babyface. But to the main roster, Bianca and Rhea absolutely have to kind of take that ascension like Cena and Batista did the same year, because they could be rivals for the next decade, and that could be the start of something much further down the line.
All right, Jeremy, you can. I'll wrap it up, but you get the last word in from the roundtable.
If I had Vince McMahon's ear, I would talk him into using that tag team turmoil match, get Charlotte and Bayley in there to beat Shayna, and then kick off a year-long feud of the 4 horsewomen versus the 4 horsewomen that culminates at Mania next year. And I'd start it there. I'd start building through SummerSlam, where you do mixed matches. Maybe Ronda faces off with somebody. You got Becky facing off with somebody. That you start creating these dynamics where you're savoring for these 4 to fight these 4 at Mania. If you can build it for a year, they've been able to do other things when they set their mind out a year out. If they know what their end goal is, like Andy said, building from backwards, that would to me be the money feud that they should focus on.
All right, I think those are all really, really good ideas. My idea is for them to bring back the I'm just kidding.
Boneyard match 2. It's against Omos.
Yeah. So I like the idea of Ronda coming back. I don't know. I mean, I would assume that she would mean really good for their ratings. Brock maybe less so because he's been sort of overexposed, but I think anytime you have Brock, because they will always book him strong, it's good for the product in general, as long as he's not killing people who they still want to use. But it's not a bad idea though. As I was talking about this Daniel Bryan thing, it's not a bad idea if you do want that nice little win to send fans home happy, to have him run and see if you get some goodwill out of the fan base, because he's one of the most liked characters in the company. I just don't think Vince sees him as that guy and wouldn't want, he'd be waiting like desperately, when can I finally beat this guy, because that's what I want to do. But anyway, so that is it. I really appreciate you guys coming on. Jeremy, Paul, Andy, this was a lot of fun. Hopefully people enjoyed this. Hope people listening on the podcast, hopefully you enjoyed it as well. And Fight Game Media Patreon, if you go to patreon.com/Fight Game Media, all of these guys are involved in some way in our network. So for Jeremy, for Paul, for Andy, I am Double G. We'll see you when we see you. Peace out.